now, as I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 14 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am joining you today from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Chinantan nations. Pursuant to the order of reference of April 20th, 2020, the committee is meeting for the purpose of receiving evidence concerning matters related to the government's response to the COVID-19 epidemic. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. During this meeting, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. In order to facilitate the work of our interpreters and ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. In order to resolve the sound issues raised in recent virtual committee meetings and ensure clear audio transmission, we ask those who wish to speak during the meetings to set your interpretation language as follows. If speaking in English, please ensure that you are on the English channel. If speaking in French, please ensure that you are on the French channel. Now, oops, wrong page. As you are speaking, if you plan to alternate from one language to the other, you'll need to also switch the interpretation channel so that it aligns with the language you're speaking. You may want to allow for a short pause when switching languages. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, you can either click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, or you can hold down the space bar while you are speaking. When you release the bar, your mic will mute itself, just like a walkie-talkie. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, they should use the raise hand function. This will signal to the chair your interest to speak. In order to do so, you click on Participants at the bottom of the screen to the left of the language globe. And when the list pops up, you'll see next to your name that you can click Raise Hand. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. Use of headsets is strongly encouraged. If you have earbuds with a microphone, please hold the microphone near your mouth when you are speaking to boost the sound quality for our interpreters. Should any technical challenges arise, for example, in relation to interpretation, or if you're accidentally disconnected, please advise the chair or clerk immediately, and the technical team will work to resolve them. Please note that we may need to suspend during these times, as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Before we can get started, can everyone click on their screen in the top right-hand corner, ensure that they are on gallery view. With this view, you should be able to see all the participants in a grid view. That will ensure that all video participants can see one another. During this meeting, we'll follow the same rules that usually apply to opening statements and the rounds for questioning of witnesses during our regular meetings. Each witness will have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, followed by the usual round of questioning from our members. And so, with that, it's time to welcome our witnesses from our first panel. First of all, as an independent witness, Jean-Paul Gladieux. From the First Nations Financial Management Board, Harold Kella, Executive Chair. From the First Nations Tax Commission, Manny Jules, Chief Commissioner. And from the Inuit Business Council, Kurt Ajisiak, Representative. Mr. Gladieux, you have 5 minutes to begin your opening remarks. Please go ahead and welcome.
Great, thank you so much. Bonjour, everybody. And thank you to the chair and all the distinguished committee members for inviting me to address you today. And also, it's not on my script, but a big hello to my friends Manny and Harold. It's great to see you guys. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, as well as the Haudenosaunee people. I myself am Anishinaabe from the Thunder Bay region, Sandpoint First Nation. And just as mentioned, I'm in the process of launching Mokote, which is my consulting firm. Mokote is my Anishinaabe, which means bear heart. Sorry, I hope this is good. As COVID-19 continues to have many impacts around the globe, I'm personally witnessing the business impact. I had resigned as the president and CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business to head to Fort McMurray to take on role of CEO at the Boucher Group, which at the time was one of Canada's largest private sector First Nation companies with over 1,000 staff strong, of which 43% were Indigenous. In March, the company, in response to the current economic climate, was required to reduce to nearly half its workforce, including senior executives. The Boucher Group also reduced its business services down from 3 to 2. Now, the reason I share this story with you is that there are numerous Indigenous businesses of significant scale and capacity that depend on the oil and gas sector in Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan that have also been significantly impacted. Thousands of Indigenous people have unfortunately been laid off, but there is hope. Hope to bring some of those impacted workers back to the field, working for their community economic development corporations and other Indigenous companies. The Government of Canada recently transferred $1 billion in grants under the oil field rehabilitation program. Unfortunately, there was no mention of targeting some of those resources to the highly capable Indigenous companies, unless, of course, the wells fall on the reserve. But I understand that that's a small fraction of the work to be done. We can and must do better. One of my proudest moments when I was at the helm of the CCAB was all the research and advocacy work that we did in procurement and program development to help support the government's commitment of a 5% Indigenous business target within the federal supply chain. Now, I know the new CEO, Tabitha, and her team are still working hard on this file. My friends, here is the can do and must do better part. When it comes to the $1 billion transfer, this is simply a missed opportunity for the federal government to add to the bottom line of their own 5% target. The Alberta and federal governments must circle around on the distribution of these resources to ensure as many Indigenous people can get back to work. A minimum target of a 5% spend in the oil field rehabilitation program, or better known as the orphan wells, must be set. It's not only the right thing to do, it just makes business sense. Now, shifting gears, I would like to commend the current commitment to the National Aboriginal Capital Corporation Association to support the network of Aboriginal financial institutions, which of course will ultimately support our Indigenous entrepreneurs. This was overdue. As I've described, there is another echelon of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit businesses with larger balance sheets that could effectively use a larger fund to support them through these difficult times to help ensure they emerge ready to continue contributing to our economy. My friends, there is so much uncertainty when it comes to infrastructure projects in this country, particularly linear projects. And all I have to say is Wet'suwet'en. I believe the federal government has an important role in empowering an Indigenous economy through the establishment of an Indigenous infrastructure fund. There are numerous examples in this country where Indigenous economic development corporations have raised hundreds of millions of dollars on their own to become equity partners in major projects. A federal backstop, similar to the Aboriginal Indigenous Opportunities Fund, would do much to the economy and, just as importantly, the certainty of our country. Miigwech.
Thanks very much, Mr. Gladu, and well in time. I appreciate that. Now, I'd like to welcome from the First Nations Financial Management Board, the Executive Chair, Harold Calla. Please go ahead for 5 minutes. Mute. You're on mute, Mr. Calla. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I, first of all, want to thank all of you for your efforts during this crisis. This COVID-19 pandemic is a worldwide challenge that is going to create something we define as a new normal. The roles of government, the private sector, and international relationships, both at a political and economic level, are under a microscope. Let us take this opportunity to recognize it's an opportunity for Canada as a federation to reinvent itself, to move beyond the status quo and create a more inclusive, stable, and representative society, a society that recognizes that a pandemic has existed in our communities since contact, not just with the COVID-19 crisis. A society that recognizes this pandemic existed and will not end until there are systemic changes in our relationship with Canada. We are here today to discuss how we can support the recovery from the effects of COVID-19 while moving forward with a plan to bring life to UNDRIP. I hope we come to understand how linked these two matters are. The Fiscal Management Act, I will remind you, was passed in 2005 with all party support during a time when Canada had a minority government. It is designed as optional legislation with Indigenous governments declaring their interest to participate. The optional approach does, I believe, respond to the spirit and intent of UNDRIP. We agreed at the time the legislation was passed, it was time to not only focus on social issues, but also focus on Indigenous economic inclusion and recovery. In the materials, some of the materials that you've been provided today, and some that were unfortunately couldn't get translated, but we'll send to you, you'll find a letter that was sent by the First Nations Tax Commission, the Finance Authority, and the Financial Management Board to the Ministers of Finance, Indigenous Services, and Crown Indigenous Relations. It lays out a series of opportunities for Canada to consider that will not only respond to Indigenous community COVID-19 needs, but will see our communities contribute to the overall recovery efforts. The Financial Management Board has recently undertaken some analysis of the overall economic activity that show what our communities currently contribute to Canada's gross national product. You have been provided this analysis in French and English. For the 75 communities that are clients of the FMA that we picked at random, you may be surprised to learn that the contribution annually is in the billions. It is always best when we consider decisions where accurate data is available. We hope that one of our suggestions that a First Nations Statistical Institute be established under the FMA, as it once was, is accepted. There is an overwhelming infrastructure deficit in our communities. This deficit has not and will not be addressed under the current government policy and approaches. We are proposing the creation of an optional First Nations Infrastructure Institute that can support communities in the design, development, and financing and maintenance of infrastructure. We propose a model that includes public-private partnerships that can design, build, operate, and create economies of scale through aggregation at a regional level. Over the last 20 years, I have observed that governments like to invest in infrastructure as a vehicle to support economic recovery. Indigenous communities could benefit from being included in these initiatives. You have also been provided a paper in English from BC First Nations on what they see as a foundational building block to a new fiscal relationship. The cornerstone of this is increasing fiscal powers available to become more self-reliant and to be able to address their own community needs. Communities have opted into the FMA are already doing some of this, but we need a seat at the fiscal table with Canada and the provinces. We have demonstrated through the Fiscal Management Act framework, we have the capacity to support communities and effectively manage increased fiscal powers. Those communities are using these gains to gain access to the capital markets, to secure private investment in our communities, to meet the challenges we are facing as a result of the pandemic, including COVID-19. We need to support building capacity in our Indigenous governments. FMB can help with financial administrative governance through our financial management system certification. This system was developed by the Financial Management Board and aligned itself with the approach to the international control framework known as COSO, a framework that was established after the economic and capital markets collapsed in 2008. We also believe an optional shared services platform as proposed by FMB would support capacity and create economies of scale that would reduce the cost of and to government of doing business. These investments will support economic recovery and reduce risk, and this will benefit all Canadians. Canada is using its fiscal capacity during the COVID-19 pandemic to support Canada and Canadians. And making enormous investments not seen in my lifetime, Canada did something similar in 2008. It worked then and it's going to work again. Let us be sure that when history looks back at how we responded to this crisis, history will see that Indigenous people and their governments were not left behind. We can and should continue to move forward with rights recognition and reconciliation and allow these initiatives to contribute to the recovery we are all looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I introduce our next guest, Madam Clerk, we're having a technical issue. I'm not understanding how it affects the meeting, so please explain.
It's resolved now. The phone lines were reversed, but everything is good now.
Okay, good. So we'll carry on now. From the First Nations Tax Commission, the Chief Commissioner, Mr. Manny Jules. Welcome, and please go ahead for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Manny Jules, Chief Commissioner of the First Nations Tax Commission, one of the 3 institutions created by the First Nations Fiscal Management Act. I was also Chief of the Kamloops Indian Band in British Columbia from 1984 to 2000. Thank you for this opportunity to address the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs as part of your study of the government's response to COVID-19 pandemic. Today, I wish to discuss our proposals to help Indigenous economies recover and emerge stronger out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The history of Indigenous peoples and pandemic has not been good. They've been used as opportunities to reduce our place in Canada and the national economy. My presentation would not be taking place were it not for past pandemics. From first contact to the 1862 epidemic in British Columbia, smallpox created the opportunity for colonization and the creation of Canada. This soon reduced our status to dependence, governed by the Indian Act and the Department of Indian Affairs. It provided the opportunity to legislate us out of the Federation and the economy because it was thought that smallpox would ultimately eliminate Indigenous peoples. But despite these efforts, we were resilient. Secwepemc leaders presented a proposal to Prime Minister Sir Wilfrid Laurier in 1910, with many of the same elements I am presenting today. As my ancestors said then, we want to be partners in this land. We want to be like brothers and sisters. We will make each other great and good. In other words, give us the same opportunities as other Canadians, and we will contribute to the strength and growth of this federation. Like many Indigenous leaders, renewing our place in the federation and economy has been my life's work. This is why we built the First Nations Fiscal Management Act. As the most successful First Nation-led legislation, today there are 300 First Nations using the FMA. Their economies and revenues were growing. They were building more economic infrastructure. Their credit rating was rising. It was a model to bring us back into the economy and the federation. Then COVID-19 happened. But lessons were learned from previous pandemics, and this time we were ready. On March the 24th, the FMA institutions wrote the federal government warning of the pending public health, economic, and fiscal calamity facing our communities and governments. On April the 9th, we sent another letter, this time to propose a 2-part strategy. First, immediately help impacted First Nations replace the foregone fiscal revenues so they can maintain services during the emergency phase of the pandemic. Second, implement an Indigenous economic recovery strategy using the FMA to enhance the Canadian economic recovery strategy. As a short-term measure, we proposed a First Nations tax deferral loan program to be established, in that First Nation debenture payments for this year be made by the federal government. This would help communities replace lost revenues so they can better meet public health requirements. We also have presented a 4-part Indigenous economic recovery strategy. Expand the First Nations Fiscal Management Act to include the First Nations Infrastructure Institute that will certify shovel-ready economic infrastructure projects much faster. Monetize existing federal infrastructure transfers so that more infrastructure can be built sooner. Expand Indigenous fiscal powers to include sales, resource, tobacco, cannabis, excise, and income taxes to support greater resilience. Expand the mandates of the FMA institutions so they can provide more statistics, services, support, and capacity to all interested Indigenous governments and organizations. This strategy will provide the foundation for a stronger Indigenous investment climate. It provides a framework so Indigenous communities can have the same opportunities to participate in the recovery strategy as other Canadians. We have been working for the past 2 months with the federal government on this strategy and are hopeful the the necessary legislative changes we are proposed are accepted and presented to Parliament this fall. We hope that this committee will continue to support our work and ensure there are no delays. Thank you very much.
Mr. Jules, thank you so much, and right on time. So we'll move on to our next speaker from the Inuit Business Council, Representative Kurt Ajiciak. Please go ahead for 5 minutes. You're still on mute, Mr. Ajiciak.
There we go. Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak. My name is Kurt Ajiciak. I'm with the Inuit Business Council of Nunavut. My background is public policy. I've gone to the Kennedy School at Harvard. I've worked also as the Chief of Staff for the government of Nunavut, the Premier's office. I've worked also on the local level to work with small organizations to build capacity. I've run a business for 25 years. My role really is to be the interim director for the new organization, the Inuit Business Council, to address some of the shortfalls in providing assistance to Inuit businesses. I'm here today to speak about some of the challenges that we've seen and some of the issues that have come up during the COVID crisis, namely the programs that exist for Canadians. Many Inuit businesses are not eligible to receive. The one example is the emergency bank account system that have set up to help businesses. These programs, unfortunately, are not available to many small Inuit business owners. So what we really request is to consider a Northern CEBA program, which would allow same opportunities for Inuit business owners to access a line of credit that is interest-free until 2021. But we request that the lines of credit be increased to 250,000, really to address some of the unique challenges that we have in the Arctic. What I mean by that is, we often have to purchase goods and ship them in the summer season to allow for a year's worth of goods to be sold. We have to take advantage of the short summer season. So in essence, really, we're trying to purchase all our goods for the entire year, hence the request for a large program such as a Northern CEBA. Secondly, we encourage governments across the North to purchase goods and services from Inuit-owned businesses. I think the federal government has been very responsive. We commend you for making changes to programs, but we encourage you to spend locally as much as you can. The current procurement system is not really conducive to this type of crisis. They favor large, long-established companies from outside the North. We look at providing a unique, COVID response to procure services locally. Thirdly, I'm speaking today really as a small business owner. We're not a grand organization. It's really small businesses that have banded together to address our specific needs. And I think I've been involved in national organizations for a long time, but I think what's lacking is the supports for small organizations that want to be the voice for, in our case, small Inuit businesses. And we would request the committee recommend support for organizations like us, specifically organizations that would allow a seat at the table when crises happen, when discussions are happening related to procurement, related to large mega projects in our Indigenous communities. So I guess to be specific, for us, we would request funding. I would say $1 million is really our initial ask if the committee was to recommend support as part of the COVID response. I think it's important that our voices are heard, and we need to foster a way for organizations like us that come together. We're really an ad hoc group, and we want to make sure that our voices are heard during the COVID and other crises that happen in our communities. In closing, Mr. Chairman, we appreciate the opportunity to speak, and we hope this dialogue will continue as we get through COVID. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gisiak. And now we go to 6-minute round of questioning. On my first panel of questioners, I have Mr. Schmale, Mr. Van Couverden, Ms. Berube, Ms. Gazan, and Jamie Schmale. 6 minutes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, to your testimony. It's greatly appreciated. Maybe I might start with Mr. Calla, if I could, quickly. Mr. Calla, what is the value of the economic activity created by the 75 communities included in your analysis?
Well, the value is in the billions, and what we have done is taken the revenue streams that have been presented in financial statements. Financial Management Board receives 5 years of financial statements from about 280 clients across the country. And what we've begun to do is an analysis of those, because I don't think this information is widely known by anybody. What is the value of the economic activity of First Nation communities, and how would you measure that? When you get to the point that it's $1 billion a year and you look at how you monetize that and say, what is the impact? That's what really our intention is. We hope that we will be able to in the future do all 300 communities that we have financial information for. And it really points to the need for a statistics institution to be able to provide this kind of data and information. I don't think, we were quite surprised in the 75 communities that we picked at random how big it was. And I don't think many of us really understood that, and understood that First Nation economies place a lot of value in the gross national product of Canada and surrounding regional economies. But it's in the billions, Mr. Schmale.
Oh, I can imagine. Now, will you be doing further analysis and data collection? And then if the answer is yes, once completed, are you able to submit those results to this committee?
We are currently undertaking all of the clients that we have now, a full analysis of what they're doing. I expect it's going to take about 6 weeks. And when we're finished, we will produce a report similar to the one that you received today that would include everybody. So yes, we will.
So, Mr. Calla, what proposals have you suggested Canada offer to Indigenous governments and businesses to combat the effect of COVID-19, and has there been a response from the government?
I think what we're looking for is a recognition that Indigenous governments are probably more at risk than others. They need to be able to sustain themselves and to find that they're not so burdened at the end of this that they can't continue to exist. So support for maintaining their operations, I think, is critical. The other thing that we've looked for is recognition of own source revenue as it is contributed to Indigenous governments to support their programs and services. I think these are significant issues that need to be dealt with and need to be considered. The challenge that we've seen at the moment is, and for many of our clients who have spoken to us, is many of the programs are outside of, they're not able to access them, at least immediately. And it takes a considerable effort to get Canada to review its approach and to include First Nation communities. This needs to be considered right out of the hopper. Manny has spoken about the need for tax relief. We have shovel-ready projects for infrastructure. These are the kinds of things that involve a lot of money. But I think more importantly, we need to be in a position where we continue to build the capacity in First Nation communities and to put more communities in a position where they can access private capital to meet their needs.
Maybe I might go to Mr. Jules. Chair, before I do, how much time do I have left?
You have 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I'm sorry, 2 minutes, 2 minutes.
I like the 3-minute answer first, but maybe Mr. Jewell, if I could, why hasn't the First Nation Tax Commission's, the proposed local revenue deferral loan program been announced by the federal government? I know you wrote a letter on that to the minister.
Well, we don't know. We've done our work. We've been waiting, patiently for a response. There's been a lot of concern expressed to us from a lot of First Nations right across the country. As you know, Jamie, tax money goes to help provide for public health services. It offsets, expenditures that the federal government really makes, and so it's critically important that we get an answer, and very soon.
So what recommendations would you like the House of Commons Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs to make to help First Nations governments recover from COVID-19?
In a nutshell, I believe that what we need is increased fiscal powers. Right now, we're completely dependent on the federal government. 90% of all of the revenues come from the federal government, and that has to ultimately change if we're able to look after ourselves. And that's something that our ancestors talked about in 1910. And so if we don't have greater tax powers, and you could see that unfolding on a daily basis with the Prime Minister's daily announcements, all of that is a result of the fact that the federal government has a tax rating, provincial governments and municipal governments have a tax rating, but First Nations by and large don't. And so if that doesn't fundamentally change, we will find ourselves continuing to be completely dependent on the federal government and not being able to prepare ourselves for the next pandemic that ultimately will happen.
So more local control, I guess that also leads to more resilience for these Indigenous communities.
We're
absolutely.
right at time. Thank you. We're right at time there. Thank you so much. We go to Mr. Van Couverton now for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, merci, Nakarmik, Miigwech, for being here today, Mr. Calla, Mr. Gladu, Mr. Gisiak, Mr. Jules. I think I speak for everybody on the committee when I say that your insights are completely invaluable and play a critical role in making us, enabling us to make better policy. And I know that I say that your contributions today are tremendous, and I also would like to say that this is a really tremendous panel today. So thank you very much. It's really nice to hear from you and good to gather some insight today. My question is mainly on the north, so I guess I'll direct it first to Mr. Gisiak, if I could, but if anybody else has follow-up afterwards. Mr. Gisiak, the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency has two COVID-19 related support systems for small and medium-sized businesses in the north, the $15 million Northern Business Relief Fund and the $34.3 million Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. These are mainly for tourism and mining and related industries, but not necessarily the infrastructure that we've heard about today from you. So in your view, is the eligibility criteria fair? Do they enable the participation of Indigenous businesses across a variety of sectors? And how can we dovetail infrastructure projects with economic development and employment and other efforts? Over to you, Mr. Gisiak.
Thank you, Adam. I think those programs that were set up in response to, I guess, small business concerns, they would address about 75% of our the council's issues. We still have some issues related to eligibility. As you know, the north, the challenge in smaller communities is having adequate office space. So most people have offices at home. And a lot of businesses are seasonal businesses, so they don't fit the criteria that were set up. And they're still not eligible because it's very difficult to sort of split between your home office, a commercial space. We don't have the luxury of having those. But I would say that the members that we reached out to, they've been very happy with the programs that were set up. But we still have some shortfalls, namely the SEBA program, which, if you recall, is a line of credit with the bank at $40,000, where $10,000 is forgivable. So I think those programs would certainly benefit, I think, the smaller folks that would not be eligible for the CanNor programs that were set up. In terms of the infrastructure, nothing is happening, I can tell you, in our communities at the moment. We are opening up on Monday, which is great. And I think the challenge is for those that actually survive. I mean, the challenge is going to be, how do we normalize our operations so that we can take advantage of some of the opportunities this summer? But I think in the long term, my worry is that, you know, our summer season is starting in 4 weeks. I have 3 months to find the money, order all my supplies, try to get it to the port and ship it up north before October. So that's where my hope is really to try to get support and relief, at least immediately, so that those issues, because if we miss the boat, we literally miss the boat. And what do we do for the next year? And that's really our concern.
Thank you, Nakamik. My follow-up question is for anybody really, and it'll focus more on connectivity. We're missing one of our colleagues today, MP Kakak, because she is in Baker Lake and she does not have the connectivity required to join us. My dad used to work for the Aboriginal Business Council in the 90s, and the challenges that he faced were, you know, quite different from a business perspective. Business is changing. We require technology these days, and that technology is not universally available in Canada. So I'd love to hear from an infrastructure perspective, from anybody else, how we might be able to better serve modern businesses and Indigenous communities with better infrastructure with regards to technology.
Who'd like that?
Perhaps Mr. Gladue.
Go ahead, Mr. Gladue.
Thank you. That's a great question, and one I think my colleagues would agree with, that there's a lot of untapped potential within the Indigenous communities, both from a business perspective as well as an employment force. And I think this paper, we all know that the infrastructure deficit is well over $30 billion in our Indigenous communities. But if I think about what's going to help unlock that potential from technology, quite frankly, it's anytime we've got any kind of infrastructure projects going in, we need to be leveraging mines, rail lines, and linear projects, electrification, by ensuring that coaxial cable, or so our communities can get access to the internet. I mean, everybody in this room, we're really lucky to have one of these and access to the World Wide Web. Many of these communities are absolutely hamstrung because they can't get connectivity. And then lastly, it's I'm also on the Resilient Recovery Task Force with a bunch of great folks from across the country, and there's a real need for dependable, renewable, clean energy for our communities. You can't build another home in many communities because there just simply isn't the energy capacity.
Right. We're right at time there.
Okay. Mr. Chair,
sorry,
if I could, I apologize for taking up too much time, but I failed to acknowledge that I'm on the sacred and traditional territory of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and first the credit, Mississauga is the Credit First Nation. Apologies.
Merci. Madame Bérubé, vous avez la parole. 6 minutes.
The floor is yours, Madame Bérubé. 6 minutes. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses, and I'd like to thank the interpreters and IT staff who are essential resources to run this committee. We're on the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and Lekui ancestral territories. Here's my question directed at Mr. Gladue. To what extent, sir, is the current turbulence in the market affecting right now and in future the borrowing power of the First Nations?
So the borrowing power of communities, I probably would love to hear from Harold and Manny on that one as well. But credit rating is really important. The challenge in many of our communities, as my colleagues know really well, is the Indian Act hampers our ability to develop credit. The Indian Act does not allow us to own property or to own our land, which is an infringement or impingement, on investment into our communities. As a prime example, right now, I'm trying to build a home on my reserve, and I have a pretty decent living, and I can't get a loan from a bank unless I'm backstopped by my community. So I think part of the market forces are just the Indian Act and it's our ability to actually attract capital. But I think if you wouldn't mind, Ms. Berube, to direct that to Manny as well, and maybe Harold.
Mr. Chair, if I could go first. I think that the immediate impact on short-term loans is real because commercial lending is now concerned about the cash flows that are flowing into First Nations. This is why I mentioned the fact that some of the analysis that we're doing, we're starting to measure the own source revenue that's contributed to First Nation governments and what that impact will be. I think in the long term, it's going to have a significant impact if we don't have fiscal capacity and if we don't see that fiscal capacity being transferred to First Nations. I think the overall problem that we face in this country when it comes to Indigenous files is we tend to look at this issue on a fiscal basis and parliamentary budgets. What we need to start doing is providing the certainty to First Nations to have access to revenue streams so that we can engage the private sector and the capital markets to provide the things that we need. We're not any different than any other government. We have to pay for things over time. I know that I haven't bought a car or bought a house that I haven't had to finance in my lifetime. So we need to be in a position where First Nations can secure their interests for their community's well-being through access to capital as they choose, and to recognize that there are revenue streams that they have access to that can pay for those things over time. I know that currently we're working with the First Nations Health Authority of BC to look at how we could provide the funding for them to put in the 10 nursing stations they need in this province, instead of waiting for annual contributions through the parliamentary budget process to put them in. The benefit that comes from providing this infrastructure earlier is obvious. Thank you.
Mr. Jules, did you want to add?
Yes, I do. But I didn't get the translation from French to English, but I understand we're talking about credit. One of the things that my ancestors talked about in 1910 is we stand for obtaining a permanent and secure title to be acknowledged by the government as such, of our ownership of our present reserves and such lands as may be added thereto. And they also said that they wanted to be able to compete on better terms with the whites in terms of making a living. And unfortunately, we're still dealing with the remnants of the Indian Act, preventing us because of sections 87 and 89 from securitizing proper credits. That's why JP can't go to the bank and get a mortgage because of those two sections of the Indian Act. And so what we need is our own title system so that we can begin to stand up ourselves. Individuals would be able to securitize their own mortgages going to the banks and therefore be able to have secure title. When post-COVID happens, individuals are going to be looking for the most secure title that they've got. And unfortunately, that isn't going to be on Indian reserves.
Mr. Jules, could you ensure that your selector is on the English channel, which is the little globe at the bottom of the screen? Yeah, you were probably on floor. Is it now?
Because it's there.
Okay, because we need to get the translation for sure. Madam Berube, you still have a minute.
Oui. Merci.
Thank you. I will just continue with Mr. Manny Jules. How do you foresee the situation of the financial markets post-crisis?
So do I put it on?
Mr. Jules, if you could click on the interpretation button, which is a globe at the bottom of your screen. Once you click it, you'll have a menu that will open up. The English will need to be selected.
Okay.
You should have three options: off, English, or French.
I did press that, and so I've got language, original audio, English and French, and I've clicked on the English.
Et maintenant, est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Can you hear me now with interpretation? Can you hear me now? Yes.
Merci.
Bon.
Back, please go ahead.
Merci beaucoup.
So how do you foresee the situation of the financial markets post-pandemic era?
The things we've been advocating is greater access to the markets. We've accomplished that somewhat through the First Nations Finance Authority, but we also need access to all of the banking institutions and the same kinds of credits that other Canadians have taken for granted. And that means having the institutional support that everyone takes for granted, including a proper land title system, so that Her Majesty doesn't own Indian reserves, and also that we've got greater fiscal powers so that we can have the same kinds of credits as the federal and provincial governments and indeed municipal governments.
Thank you very much. And now we go to Ms. Gazan for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to start off my time by giving a notice of motion. Given the elements outlined in Supplemental Estimates A that affect Indigenous communities, I give notice that on a future date, I will move the following motion. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee invite the Ministers of Indigenous Services and Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations to provide testimony regarding the supplementary estimates A no later than June 16th, 2020. I'll now move on to questions. Thank you very much. So this is for any one of the panelists today. I want to thank you for all being here. That just in regards to this question. So there have been studies showing that there will be severe gendered economic impacts from COVID-19. Could any of the witnesses expand on how Indigenous women, 2S LGBTQIA plus individuals will be affected differently economically by the impacts of COVID-19? Anybody can answer. I'll leave it open.
Mr. Calla, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that question. I think much of the economic activity in the areas you described is small business. Small business will be significantly impacted as a result of this because they're not able to financially withstand a long-term impact of COVID-19 because they don't have the balance sheet, if I can call it that, and the cash flow to be able to sustain themselves. So I think it's absolutely critically important that small business and individuals have access to the programs that larger corporations are getting access to. And not that larger corporations shouldn't get it, but we can't forget people in our communities. I believe that women, particularly in our communities, are the backbone of Indigenous economies. And I think that they need to be recognized and supported in ways that aren't necessarily consistent with the programs that are laid out today. And I would encourage the committee to make that recommendation to Parliament and to the government. Thank you.
Mr. Jules, did you want to say something? Mr. Jules had his hand up too.
Yes. I think one of the most important things that one of the casualties of COVID-19 is the inquiry into murdered and missing women, Indigenous women. And I think that it laid out a number of recommendations that should be followed up on by the federal government. But it also underlines the fact that Indigenous women and others are impacted by the economy because they don't have the landless as a result of marriage breakdown. They're the ones impacted against, with the inquiry on murdered and missing women more than anyone else. And so what we have to do is make sure that we have sustainable economies so that marriages will stay together, that our families will be important and, be able to withstand not only COVID-19, but also the economic impacts after.
Thank you so much. I'll move on to my next question. So social enterprises often offer unique opportunities for employment and benefits for our communities. I can think of in Winnipeg, for example, we have a social enterprise called Mother Earth Recycling. Can any of our witnesses describe any unique challenges that Indigenous social enterprises are facing during the pandemic.
Mr. Calla.
Oh, you're on mute, Mr. Calla. Thank you.
Off. I really appreciate the question, because we don't often understand what we mean by social enterprise. And we look at Indian bands as orders of government, and we don't understand that as they realize their Aboriginal rights and title, that they become social enterprises. And I think the challenge that we face in our social enterprises are no different than the challenges we face in Indigenous people, in that we don't have access to capital, we don't have long-term revenue streams, and it's very difficult for us to produce strategies that provide the confidence to the investment community. And I think that has to come from a recognition that, first of all, we are social enterprises in Indigenous communities. Historically, we were, before European contact. We provided, we had economies that stretched from Alaska, on the West Coast, from Alaska to Mexico. We provided for our communities from those social enterprise efforts. And I think that's not been recognized. Once we became wards of the government and we were marginalized from the economy, we weren't allowed to do that anymore. And as a consequence of that, we haven't been able to build wealth. If you look at the biggest challenge that we face as Indigenous communities, either in our businesses or our governments, is we've been marginalized and we've not been able to establish the platform to build wealth and to have a balance sheet. And those things have to change. And that comes through a new fiscal relationship. And they continue to access, because of secure revenue streams, to access capital in manners that we choose. Those are the biggest issues. And then as governments within our community, we can support, as a government in our community, those social enterprises that are created in the areas that we live. And that is no different than other orders of government do. Thank you.
Third time right there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ms. Kazan. We're now to the 5-minute round of questioning. I have Mr. Dalton, Ms. Damoff, Mr. Viersen, and Mr. Batiste. Mark, you have 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today and for your remarks. Just wondering if each of you could actually respond to this question right here, and that is, what would be the impact on First Nations if non-renewable resource development projects stop going ahead? So again, if the impact, go ahead.
Oh, that is a great question, because a lot of our Indigenous communities rely on the natural resource sectors to for employment and significant revenue for their businesses. So the impact would be significant. We recognize that there is an energy transition that needs to happen in this country with particularly oil and gas, but we've got other sectors like mining that's going to provide the gap stop in the longer term. And all I'm going to suggest is that as we move forward in the policies and around infrastructures, ensuring as we transition into the clean tech, into the renewables, into hydrogen, wind, solar, what have you, that companies or government incentivizes companies to co-invest with our Indigenous communities as we build it out, because our communities are just getting caught up with a lot of the capacity to compete in the natural resource sector. So we don't want to miss another wave as the next wave comes.
I saw Mr. Calla with his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the question. The Financial Management Board was instrumental in supporting the creation of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, First Nations who were interested in resource development. And as a result of that, we got a lot of insight into the potential economic impacts of major resource development. I think the big issue that has always been there is the approval process, the environmental issues that are faced, the cumulative impacts. We're starting to be able to resolve those issues in ways that many communities along these corridors for linear projects support. The economic impact of not proceeding with these initiatives is going to be significant to First Nation communities, both in the short and the long term. And I think as we move into a new fiscal relationship that sees us sharing in the revenues that other orders of government get is even going to be more so. So I think that as JP said, we do recognize that we need to transition, from fossil fuels and time. But the fact is, we're not there yet, and we need to be able to move forward. I think it's a tragedy that we're buying oil from the Middle East when we have it within this country, and we got to find ways to solve these kinds of problems. Thank you.
GCAC, you have your hand up.
Yes, I echo those comments. I think it's important to recognize that many of our communities rely on projects such as mining, especially for us in the north. Although we want to balance that with managing the environment, if those projects are put on hold or stopped, I mean, it would have disastrous effects right across our communities. And guess what? I mean, it would impact most small Inuit businesses in the north. I think we need to work on supporting those projects. Look, I recognize a lot of those companies are global nationals. However, we need to ensure that they have at least an opportunity to support their projects in a way that, we ensure that it's balanced, I guess. So for me, coming from the north, it's important to ensure those projects continue. This may go on for a while, and we're happy to report we have no COVID cases up here, but we know it's just a matter of time. So we have to recognize we need to support those big projects so that those families continue to get that income that they need. Thank you.
Half a minute, Jamie.
Go ahead, Manny, if you want to say a few words on this.
Yeah, I just, one of the things we've been advocating right across the country is, firstly, I want to say that I believe in the integrity of the federal and provincial tax systems. What has to happen is there has to be an orderly vacating of tax rooms so that First Nations would be able to take over a portion of the resource taxes that are collected within our traditional and treaty territories. And therefore, we would be able to benefit directly from resource exploitation. We would be in a position to look after our own infrastructure and take care of ourselves as opposed to depending on the largesse of the federal government. And once those steps are taken, I believe that the wealth of this country will be unlocked. You need look no further than the Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario and here in British Columbia as well, but right across the country. We benefit from. Sorry.
I'm sorry, sir. We're right at beyond time there. Yep. I have Miss Damoff as our next speaker for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to start by acknowledging that I'm on the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. And I want to thank our panelists today. Once again, an incredibly helpful information that's being shared. I do want to ask about infrastructure, but I first want to start with you, JP. I think you were sat on some committees with my son Fraser and Tabitha Bull when they were both at the IESO on moving Indigenous communities to renewable energy projects. And at the last meeting, we heard from one of the witnesses about the economic benefits of transitioning to green energy. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the federal government could play a role in transitioning to green energy to power our First Nations communities.
That's a great question, and thank you. Let me use one example of a First Nation, Henby Inlet. They went out to the market and raised $900 million in senior debt to be a 51% equity stakeholder in a 300 megawatt wind farm project. What's extraordinary about this project, none of that financing came from within Canada. It came from all over the world, not Canada. So it's broken. It's about creating the space for investment in partnering with Indigenous communities. That could be through tax incentives. That could be through also creating adders to energy produced by Indigenous energy projects. And then lastly, just from a big picture perspective, we're talking about creating bonds. At OPG, they created a green bond. Why don't we create an Indigenous bond that's directed towards Indigenous projects, where people can get a good return on their dollar, and then we got the money to backstop to invest in that type of infrastructure.
That's a terrific idea. In the First Nations Tax Commission website, there's a report that talks about, and I'm going to quote from it, the current First Nations infrastructure system is the least effective government infrastructure system in Canada. First Nation infrastructure costs the most to build, takes the longest to develop, and has the shortest operational lives. So there's obviously something broken in the way that we're doing infrastructure on reserve, and I'm just wondering if I could perhaps hear from all of you about creating an better infrastructure and creating a facility. You've talked about it already, but how can we move on this? Because it's something that obviously needs to get done.
The first step, really, we've been having discussions with the federal government now for a number of years. I first introduced the concept to Minister Bennett in 2016. We've done a considerable amount of work. We've got a panel of experts right across the country. What we need is legislation. What we need is a memorandum to cabinet giving direction that legislation be drafted, and then the legislation could be introduced as early as this fall. And without a legislative base, we can't monetize federal transfers. We can't open up opportunities for private-public partnerships, including green approaches to dealing with infrastructure. And that empowers First Nation governments. Right now, all of the power rests with the federal government, and there's no way that any government, even during the COVID-19 crisis, will write a check for $30 to $45 billion. And so we need investment, but we cannot approach it without a legislative mandate from the federal government. And then we can reach out and work with provincial governments, municipal governments, as well as other First Nation governments as well.
So
I have Mr. Gisiak had his hand up.
Okay,
Mr. Gisiak, could you just lift your microphone up an inch for more clarity? Up, that's fine. Thank you.
I think that's a good question. For us in the Arctic, I think the critical thing is looking at the procurement system that's currently in place. It often favors companies that are outside the North. And I think we need to think about how do we structure it so that it takes advantage of the local capacity that exists. As you heard this morning, I think the challenge for small Indigenous-owned companies is access to capital. We could certainly bring in capital that we need if we actually had a fair shot at some of those big mega projects in our communities. The infrastructure deficit is huge. I could speak to some of the energy projects that we wanted to undertake in the North to reduce our reliance on diesel. Some of the green initiatives that exist they're not set up to service Northern communities. We certainly need to get off diesel, but the procurement and the priorities that are set, they just don't allow for us to try innovative solutions at the moment.
Can I just apologize to the witness though, because I said on reserve and I didn't mean to exclude the North from the questions. So
thank you. And with that, we move to Mr. Viersen for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Meant to unmute and I turned off my camera. I want to congratulate Mr. Pulowski for getting a haircut. Looks good. Here in the Promised Land, we've been able to get haircuts now for a couple of weeks. So hopefully in Ontario, they're starting to open up the hair salons too soon. Mr. Jules, I just you mentioned something a little. Oh, I don't see him there right now, so I'll skip that one a little bit. Mr. Gisiak, I'll jump to you. PPE dispersal. That's been a big challenge in Northern Alberta, particularly for First Nations communities. The Alberta government is partnered with McDonald's and A&W to disperse PPE across the province, and that does seem to be working fairly well. Are your group of companies, are they able to help with PPE dispersal, and is the PPE available? That's in Saskatchewan. I know many of the Northern First Nation communities just say there's no PPE available, let alone trying to get it dispersed. Do you have any comments around that?
The PPE is certainly something that we thought about in March. We don't have a McDonald's. We don't have the big change that you would typically see in Southern Canada. I think our Chief Medical Health Officer and his team has worked well with the national organizations to allow for PPE to be shipped up north. As you know, we don't have any active cases of COVID in the north. So I think the idea of having PPE is not top of mind. I do have a partner that is in the medical field, and that's certainly a concern for our immediate family. And I think, small businesses can play a role. We have the capacity to build face masks and small items at our shop, but I think it's something that we're currently not been asked to assist with.
Have you been submitting at all with submitting to the procurement, government procurement for PPE? Have you been at all engaged in that at all?
I have looked at the procurement, but as my comments earlier, the procurement system is set up to favor the large companies. And I think that's where it would be helpful to set up a regional procurement system that would allow for local regional companies to bid on some of the work. Look, it's a touchy issue, I know. And I think it's important that we start to recognize that these systems are set up to favor the large companies. I think a lot of our Indigenous companies would certainly benefit if we set up a regional organization similar to the current, the CanNors and the regional organizations. If that was passed on to them, I think they would certainly provide a better avenue for small regional businesses to bid on.
Mr. Jules,
I'm
sorry. I saw Mr. Jules with his hand up. Sorry.
One interesting story that just happened within the last 2 weeks is my tribal council and our health authority were trying to secure PPEs for our communities. And lo and behold, it was the provincial government who took our share. And part of the reason, of course, is we don't have the capacity within our communities to make our own, and that is one of the reasons we have to be part of the retooling of the Canadian economy after the pandemic settles.
Jean-Paul?
Yeah, just really quickly, if you go to the CCAB website too, there are numerous Indigenous suppliers that can produce, and a lot of them have shifted for a lot of the PPE. So just a little shout out to Tabitha and the team, because there are a lot of capable Indigenous businesses that can help with the PPE and as well as distribution.
We had Tabitha last week Friday at committee, and at that point she hadn't heard of any of them being able to secure a contract, and so that's a little bit concerning. As it appears that we have Canadian capacity, and yet a lot of the PPE that we're getting sourced is coming from offshore. So, Mr. Izijak, one of the I guess, do you have any ideas on your communities if PPE needs to get out in a hurry? Any ideas on what the stockpile is up there, and perhaps just from your perspective, just to get it on the record, like the A&W model works well in Alberta. Every small town in Alberta has an A&W. That's not a problem. In your community, is there a similar a network of, I know in Africa,
Mr. Viersen, we're way over.
Come on.
Perhaps you could retrieve that question later on. It's a good one. But right now, we're going to go to, for 2.5-minute round, Ms. Gaudreau and Ms. Gazan. Ms. Gaudreau, please go ahead. 2.5 minutes.
Point of order, Bob. Did we skip me?
I have a point of order. Yes.
I heard my name being called in the 5-minute round, but I don't remember getting my question.
You know what? You're right. I've been
Okay. Sorry.
I apologize, Ms. Goudreau, because my bouncing around looking at blue hands up and who's speaking and what the time is, and I completely missed my friend, Mr. Batiste. So I apologize, and I'm going to give you 5 extra seconds.
Accept your apology, and I know you didn't mean to do it. You're doing a great job as chair, Bob. I'm coming to you from the Eskasoni Reserve. It's the largest Mi'kmaq community. We got close to 5,000 people, and I'd say the majority of the people in this community don't see Section 87 and Section 89 of the Indian Act as negative things. So, Manny, I'd just like you to elaborate a little bit on your tax rating that you talked about and how that helps the Indigenous economic recovery strategy. Can you speak to those points a bit? You're on mute, Manny.
There. Okay, part of the problem that I talked about earlier is the restrictions of the Indian Act to be able to go to the local bank, as JP was talking about. And one of the reasons is because of Section 89. And that leaves us completely dependent on housing from the federal government. And the Minister of Indian Affairs builds about 2,000, agrees to mortgage.
Can you, Manny, tell the committee what Section 89 is? I know what it is, but I just want to make sure it's clear.
Well, it's an ability to be able to come on reserve and seize property, and that restricts us from being able to be mortgaged. It restricts our ability, our small business owners, to be able to securitize abilities to get into business, and so that's a jurisdictional question. And what has to happen is that First Nations have to be able to have the jurisdiction to be able to make their own determinants themselves at the local level. But the hindrance for us getting to the capital market is Section 87 or 89 of the Indian Act. The other is the personal tax exemption under 87. One of the things that's led to, again, is a complete dependence on the federal government and all of its resources. And that has its roots going back to 1927 of the Indian Act. And so what happened is that my ancestors were asking for the land question to be settled here in British Columbia. We were calling on the federal and provincial governments to come to the table to deal with us. And one of the things they did in 1927 was forbid us from being able to collect taxes from ourselves. And that meant that we couldn't have potlatches, couldn't have winter dances, weren't able to raise revenue on our own. And that's led to the situation again, because of the lack of jurisdiction, to have complete dependence on the federal government. And so it impacts housing. It means that we'll never catch up to the housing backlog on a national basis. If you believe the federal government, it'll be 300 years before we catch up to the housing backlog on a national basis. If you believe the Assembly of First Nation, it'll take us 800 years. And it has its roots in the Indian Act. And one of the things I've been advocating is a proper land title system so that we can have our own titles and creating a basis where we can go to the markets with our own credit.
Can you expand on what you meant by a tax rating? And that was one of the part of the questions. What does that mean?
Well, what happens when you have tax jurisdiction, and you can see it clearly with the federal government's announcements on a daily basis. The reason they can do that is because they have the best credit rating in the country. That's why municipal governments are going to the federal government asking for programs. That's why small businesses are going to the federal government asking for programs, and indeed the provincial governments. And this goes right to the heart of the fiscal makeup of Canada. And one of the problems we've got as First Nations is we're not part of the fiscal makeup. We're part of the dependency that's been brewing in our communities as a result of colonization. And so when we talk about a credit rating, we've demonstrated through the First Nations Finance Authority that we can go to the international bond market using our own tax credits, using our own business acumen to be able to get the bonds and debentures. And we've been very successful at that. We've received over $900 million since 2007. So there are successes, but what the basis of those successes has been jurisdiction.
Mr. Calla, I see you had your hand up. Did you want to add on that?
Yes, I do, and thank you. I think the fundamental challenge that we face in our relationship with Canada is that we're seen as a program, we're not seen as a government. We're seen as part of a 12-year cash flow cycle. We need to get to the point where not only the departments that report to you, but Finance and Treasury Board and the PMO start to recognize us as governments that require jurisdiction, that require a seat at the fiscal table, so that we can leverage, as we've proven we can do through the First Nation Finance Authority, those secure revenue streams to support our own needs.
Okay, we're at time right there. Thank you very Madame Gaudreau, mes excuses.
My apologies. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Excellent. So considering the fact that this is a very short time frame, I'll ask for your help, because actually what I'd like to find out, Mr. Jules, is you talked about 4 stages for economic recovery, and I'd like you to tell me what. I'd like to ask the others to tell me what you think about these 4 different stages. Mr. Jules, I'll give you the floor first.
You're on mute, Manny.
Thank you, Harold. One of the things we need fundamentally, the ask really is jurisdiction. And in order to pursue the jurisdiction is a legislative mandate from the federal government to pursue that. And in that way, we would be able to begin to look after ourselves. That's the basic problem that we've got in our communities, is we're completely dependent on the federal government. We're completely dependent on the provincial governments for its infrastructure, i.e. hospitals. And so in order to change that, what the FMA institutions are asking for is greater autonomy, greater jurisdiction through the First Nations Management Act.
So I'd like you to tell me a little bit more about the other aspects of the other 3. You talked about the transfer, about there were other parts to your program for recovery. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. What I talked about, I'm just going to try to pull it up. Expand the First Nations Fiscal Management Act to include the Infrastructure Institute. That's critically important, because if we can't build stuff on our own, we're going to be completely dependent on somebody else. Right now, the Department of Indian Affairs, when they build infrastructure, you end up negotiating for 10 years and you build one water system. With the First Nations Infrastructure Institute, instead of building one water system for potable water in one community, we could be looking at building 100. With healthcare, we could be building 100 facilities as opposed to one-offs in each of our communities. When we're saying we want to monetize federal transfers, right now there's no way to monetize the federal transfers for capital projects on reserves. If the federal government monetizes, that means greater amount of resources that would be at First Nations and the federal government's disposal to build infrastructure, not only for our community needs, but also business-ready infrastructure, which is critically important. And we need to expand the fiscal powers so that we get the tax revenues that's being raised in our communities. As an example, out of the 109 First Nation communities that are collecting about $70 million in real property tax, the federal and provincial governments are collecting $750 million more than the First Nations. So they're collecting areas taxes in terms of resource development, tobacco, cannabis, the excise tax, the income taxes. All of those are going right now to the federal and provincial governments. What we're saying is that if there's a true fiscal relationship we should be the jurisdiction to collect those resources.
Thank you very much. We're at time there.
Est-ce que je peux demander si les témoins...
Could I ask if the other witnesses agree with Mr. Jules? If you could just signal that you're in agreement, because we are out of time.
2 thumbs up. There you have 3. Merci.
Merci
Thank
beaucoup,
you.
Monsieur
And now,
Président.
Ms.
Thank you.
Half minutes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to start out by thanking Mr. Jules for his observations about the limitations that are contained in the Indian Act. I agree. I think this racist policy needs to be replaced with human rights. My question is for you. How do you believe that the full adoption and implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People would help assist Indigenous businesses in the future, particularly should we experience future pandemics?
And we will. History has demonstrated that even though we as First Nations we've lived through many pandemics. This is another one, and we will face one in the future. And if we're not ready through having greater fiscal powers, we're going to be in the same situation. So how I interpret the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples is by giving us the way forward so that we can begin to legislate our way back into the federal and provincial economies, and therefore the national economy and global economies, and be able to take care of ourselves and our families, our elders, our youth, our children, and the future generations.
I believe Jean-Paul would also like to comment. Go ahead, Mr. Gladue.
Thank you very much. The other thing is that we can't ignore the power and influence of the private sector. I think Canada could be looking at, when we talk about supply chains, et cetera, rewarding those good actors that are working with our Indigenous businesses and communities. CCAB has the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program, and I know the team's working on PAR for government, but if a company came with those great practices to support Indigenous in partnership, those are the companies that should be rewarded federal contracts, not the ones that aren't. Everything else is equal.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Asijiak also had his hand up,
please.
Sir.
Thank you.
Manny, the Inuit support UNDRIP 100%, and we echo those sentiments. And I completely agree with JP. I mean, I think it's important that our communities are given the opportunity to bid on some of the work that's happening in our communities. And I think it just makes sense. And I think that's where we ask the committee to recommend some of these major changes. It's going to take time, but I think we need to do it now.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Zimmer, it's your turn. I know there were some technical issues. If you can hear me.
Is the sound good now?
Well, I'm going to let you start, but we may have to interrupt because it would be a breach of parliamentary privilege if we weren't able to conduct the proper translation. So go ahead and see how it works.
Is it good now? Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me?
I'm not getting any complaints.
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah, it should. Is it working?
Go ahead. Bob, go ahead, please. Well, Madam Chair, I can't hear Mr. Zimmer now.
Is that sound working now?
Okay, now it is. Go ahead.
Is the sound working now? Because yeah, okay. Is that okay?
Go ahead, please.
Chair, until we get him, maybe we should.
Yeah, I guess the reception.
Okay, I'm going to have to intervene at this point. Mr. Schmale, could you offer a substitute for Mr. Zimmer while we continue to work on his technical issue?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just ask a few questions if I could until Mr. Zimmer gets better connected. Maybe opening the floor, Mr. Kalla, you had touched on it just a I don't know, about 30 minutes ago, about how the status quo isn't working, and each and every one of you have touched on it in some way. And let's talk more about that, the financial relationship with First Nations communities in order to allow them to succeed as communities. Maybe let's expand on that, and we can open the floor and hear what people have to say.
Thank you. I think, you know, I'm an accountant by training, for those who don't know. And I came back to my community in '87 and realized that we were all about program management. We weren't really dealing with anything else. We didn't have any capacity. We didn't have any revenue streams. We couldn't go to the bank and borrow money. We couldn't respond to our needs. And I started to realize very quickly that after however many years of the Indian Act and the relationship with Canada, it was not getting better. The gap was widening. So I had come from the private sector, and I realized very quickly that government was never going to be the long-term solution, and that we needed to be able to have access to re-engage in the development of an entrepreneurial class within our society of Indigenous communities, and put us in a position where we were starting to generate revenues for ourselves. And I think that what happened with the Indian Act is we got sidelined. We weren't allowed to evolve or emerge as a government or as people. And so all of a sudden now it's become such a huge problem that nobody knows what to do. And we're constrained by this notion that it has to happen within a fiscal budget with the federal government. And that has to change to the point where we recognize that we have to have private sector investment. We have to create a fiscal capacity in First Nations to be able to go to the investment community and secure investment so that the things that we need can be provided for in an orderly way at a time of need and paid for just like other orders of government do. We have now, with the creation of the Fiscal Management Act, the mechanisms to support capacity development in our communities through the Financial Management Board and financial management systems. We can manage the tax systems through the Tax Commission, and we can go to the capital markets through the Finance Authority once we've got these secure revenue streams. We're now using our own source revenue in that process as well. So the mechanism is there, it's proven itself. You heard from the Finance Authority not long ago. They're shortly going to be at the $1 billion range of funds raised. They've got a AA credit rating. So we've proven it works. So my question to you is, what's the problem? Let's just get on with it. Give us these revenue streams, get government out of the way, and allow us to manage ourselves. That takes a philosophical change at the government level and at the bureaucratic level.
Okay, let's talk about the off-ramp. Where do we get started? Is this in bits and pieces? Is this all at once? Those that kind of, I don't know if like's the right word, but are on the status quo and are a little hesitant about taking that off-ramp. How do we do this?
Well, I think, if I might, Mr. Chair, I think too often we find ourselves saying, well, unless we get 633 on side, we can't do anything. I think we have to recognize that we have to move forward with those who have capacity and are willing to engage in the development of the capacity to move forward. And what we have seen as a result of the activities since the Fiscal Management Act was passed is that as people see success around them of people who have engaged, they want to follow. Soon, you're going to see a documentary that's been produced by the Financial Management Board that lays out some of the challenges that we faced historically and the successes that we've enjoyed as a result of the Fiscal Management Act. And you're going to see examples of communities who have taken these tools and developed an independent self-reliance and found a way to get out of the social spiral that they're in, to educate their kids, to give their kids an opportunity. It comes from fiscal capacity. It comes from leadership having some hope that they can do the things that they need to. There have been some good things that have been done recently. Certainly the move to 10-year grants is a good one. We need to move with legislative reform to the Fiscal Management Act, create a Stats Institute, create a Infrastructure Institute, and provide long-term funding from the federal government. We're not going anywhere. The federal government's not going anywhere. It's silly for us not to engage in accessing the capital markets to respond to our needs and doing it on an optional basis with those First Nations who are ready. We cannot expect everybody to move lockstep.
Jamie, we're at a time there, full 5 minutes.
Can I quickly just mention, Chair? I took over from Bob Zimmer, but I think my time I'm up scheduled to go again. But if Mr. Zimmer's connected, I'm happy to let him have a round. But,
okay,
we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we need the ability to translate. Otherwise, we can't run the meeting. So, Miss Zan, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hello. Hi there.
Hello.
Nice to see all of you. I always like to say thank you, Walalan, and hello from the beautiful unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia, up here in northern Nova Scotia, Cumberland, Colchester. So I'd like to ask all of you a couple of questions. I'm going to put them all into one question, and then if we have time, if each of you could just have an answer to let me know what you think, I'd be really appreciative. So today is World Environment Day, as you probably are aware, and that's a time for us to reflect on what we're doing as human beings to help turn things around to protect the natural environment. So in spite of the urgency of the COVID-19 pandemic and the horrifying violence and indefensible acts of racism against racialized peoples right across North America that we are seeing right now, which I know happens, but it's being shown on TV screens more now. There's more attention. Thank God it's coming to more attention. Let's do something about it. Also, the domestic violence, misogyny, and racism, which Indigenous women experience daily, both on and off reserve. These things must surely affect the finances of Indigenous communities and their ability to grow wealth. So I'm curious about the desire and intent of Indigenous communities and businesses, including the witnesses here today, to put more attention and investment into the protection and well-being of women and girls and LGBTQ2S peoples, and also the interest in intent to invest and develop in more green jobs, healthy natural products, and alternate green energy projects. So who would like to go first? Okay, Jean-Paul Gladu, please.
I'll just address one part of that. With regards to the environmental protection, we're often seen as the stewards of Mother Earth. What I think is an opportunity for this country at all levels, private sector, federal government, etc., is to empower people by having seats at the table. The Guardians program is an example of having our moccasins on the ground across the country, and I know there's a proposal that's coming forward, and I know it's been partially supported. But it's really important that our voices are at the table, having us in the board of directors, having us on the Canadian energy regulators, having the Indigenous advisory group, and making sure that our women are also represented on these boards in these powerful positions to influence. That's how you build the capacity, and that's how you build stronger relationships.
Mr. Ajiziak has his hand up as well, Ms. Zan.
Okay, Mr. Ajiziak.
I agree with JP. I think you need to back that up with financial resources for those people to participate. I could tell you it wouldn't take much really for any group such as the Inuit Business Council or others to find members who would like to speak on behalf of these important issues. I would go further by saying, look, our infrastructure deficits in our communities need addressing. The challenge is the procurement. It's going to take 10 years to procure hundreds of millions of dollars in our communities. We need to think of this as a COVID procurement strategy. We need to get the money out the door for companies that are able to build these, water treatment centers, sewage treatment plants, houses. I think we need to address all those issues as urgently as we're addressing these issues today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Manny, Mr. Jules?
One of the things that happens with different pandemics is they fundamentally change society. And one of the things we've got to be able to do is think about what societal changes are going to happen as a result of COVID-19 and truly make this world a better place. And in order to do that, you have to be able to make the steps necessary. And as I've been saying throughout this this period of time, it has to be based in jurisdiction, because we have to be in a position to look after those who are most vulnerable within our communities. And when you look at that, who's most disenfranchised from land in our communities? It's the women as a result of marital breakdown. It's the children. And so we have to be able to have the institutions to be able to look after those affected, but also we have to be able to have the entrepreneurial spirit to be able to make sure that we are resilient within our economies. And right now, all of that's being shut off from us.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. We're right at time there now.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Mr. Zimmer. Mr. Zimmer, in his cross-country drive, has now purchased a new vehicle, or apparently I can see you much clearer now, Bob. So let's try it once again. Bob Zimmer, please go ahead for 5 minutes. Once again, Bob Zimmer, I can see you, but I can't hear you. It looks like Mr. Zimmer has connection has frozen. I'm going to ask Mr. Dalton if he can fill in on this CPC segment for 5 minutes. Mr. Dalton.
Okay, great, thank you. Kirk, if you could just talk a bit about just the businesses in Nunavut and what are, just as far as the spectrum, and what is the prime focus? Most businesses, what are they in? What are the? You just give us a lay of the land as far as the business community, the Indigenous business community in Nunavut.
Yep, thank you. Our business community consists of mostly small entrepreneurs. That would be 20 businesses or less. They range from a small convenience store to small hotels to companies that bridge the services like Canadian Tire in their community. So they would bring in most of the goods. Small builders, companies like ours, we service governments with drones, imagery. We have folks that are consultants, former politicians. So, there's a full spectrum. Companies like mine that I can afford office space to small businesses that are mostly at home. Revenues could be 50,000 or less, I would say, for most small Inuit businesses. But we do have businesses that are in the millions that have been around for 20 or 30 years. That are likely doing big projects with the mining companies. So we have a huge gamut. And I think the challenge for us as a small business community is having a seat at the table. We often watch with interest some of these big mega projects, but we're often so busy trying to service our customers that we don't actually put our hand up and say, I think it's time that we collectively get together and speak on these important issues. And that's really the impetus for our small organization. Now, what we're requesting from governments is financial support. $1 million for our organization would keep us running. And I think that's where we think we need to have voices at the table. I think it's important that you provide that support because we need it. We need to be able to bring people to the meeting and share our voices. And we appreciate the opportunity.
Don't mind me asking, just the impact of air transportation. Obviously, most of the communities are fly-in communities, especially during this COVID period. What has been the impact on businesses, cost of living? Have you noticed changes? Are the flights has that changed, or is it still the same as it was before?
I could tell you everyone's going bananas, especially folks that weren't raised and born in the North and they're dying to get out. I think that's the real impact. And I think it's really fostered sort of a panic in our communities. Air travel has virtually stopped. The Nunavut government is supporting our airlines. You know, that's a tough call. I think we need to ensure that these vital transportation lines are kept open. That's where we would ask the levels of government to support communities that are only fly-in, all of our communities are only fly-in. In terms of revenues, look, we see the CERBs, we see the financial supports that are targeted Indigenous communities in our community. So there's certainly enough spending. It's just, you know, we can't live on supports. We need the businesses open. We need to foster regional projects where we support the local businesses, because I can't survive on handouts, nor do I want handouts. I want to bring my employees back. I want to be able to pay them a fair wage for good work. And I think that's what most businesses want. But I guess for an ask, we know you need to support organizations like ours financially on an ongoing basis if you want to hear us and our voices. Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, I guess my time is over. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yeah. I'm going to offer Mr. Zimmer one more opportunity just before the end of today's meeting. We should have a chance to him. Just say something now, Bob. Go ahead. Just try it.
Is it working now?
I can hear you fine now. So hopefully
it's kind of my device literally just overheated. So Dr. Pulowski, it is that warm in Thunder Bay today, as you know. So it's very warm. But I'll get to my questions. Thanks for the opportunity, Chair.
Not right now, Bob. I'm sorry. You will have an opportunity coming up, okay? You'll have another opportunity. Right now, it is Mr. Pulowski, 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Great panel. In passing, I wanted to mention something. Maybe if anyone has any ideas on this, they could get back to me after the meeting. Fort William First Nations is having trouble finding financing to build a long-term care home on the reserve. It seems like a great idea for a lot of reasons. We've turned over pretty well every infrastructure rock we can find. Hopefully something's coming up, but not yet. But all of you seem to be in finance, understand it probably a lot better than I do. If you have any ideas of where they could possibly find that funding, public-private partnerships, things like this, let me know. But the question I want to ask is more a philosophical question. And that, let's take the Ring of Fire. Obviously, this is a tremendous opportunity for development. I think all of you, if I interpret you correctly, are for development, for bringing jobs to communities, and see it as a way of improving life. But there's certainly a downside to development. Having been to many fly-in communities, these are in a lot of ways tremendous communities. They're becoming more and more unique in the world, that they're people that are living a pretty traditional lifestyle that they've lived for thousands of years. And with development comes a lot of bad things. And how do you reconcile those? I take you're on the development side, but what do you say to somebody who's kind of questioning, do we really want that development? Maybe I could start off with JP, because I know you're from around here. So.
Oh, I am from Thunder Bay, and I'm actually on the board of directors of Noront, which has many of the assets in the Ring of Fire. And my immediate reaction is to give the communities the opportunity to manage. Communities are going to stumble, they're going to stub their toes, but they're also going to find great opportunities. And some people, like in any society, will be challenged. And community as a whole, I believe, given the opportunity, will succeed. We're resilient people, and we need to avoid the paternalistic approach that's been very much a fabric of the Canadian government.
Is everyone hearing a phone in their?
Nope, I'm not hearing a phone. So anyways, I'll end it there in saying that communities have to be empowered to make their own decisions. I think we shouldn't be making like that. Those communities need to decide what's best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. The communities have to decide for themselves what's best for them. But maybe I could have the input of some of the other panel members on the question of development versus non-development.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I've actually spent some time in the Ring of Fire communities with the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, and some of those communities are part of this coalition. I think part of the discussion that we've had is decision-making around approvals and recognition of Matawa as a government agency that can participate in that process. I know in my own community in Squamish, we actually issued our own certificate on environmental assessment, and a LNG project is proceeding because of it. This really gets down to sharing power and decision-making, and you need to open the door to allow that to happen. The times that I spent up there certainly indicated to me that there were communities who are very prepared to support these kinds of development. Some are not. We're never going to get consensus. It would be nice, but will we get it? The other thing that the Ring of Fire is dependent upon is infrastructure. And the province of Ontario needs to build the road up there, do it as a public-private partnership. And the federal government can step in and provide those means by which that road can access those remote communities. That way we can run fiber optic cable up there and do a bunch of good things for that whole region and not just the Indigenous communities. It takes a coordinated effort, and it takes the provinces to be on side. Part of this also means the new fiscal relationship that Manny and we talk about suggests that there should be some revenue sharing that takes place. Many years ago, I was asked by the Canadian government to go across Canada and to look at First Nation participation in new projects. That included not just First Nations, but local governments. And the mayor of Prince George said to me at the time, "This is great when you're here and I see my people working, but when you leave, there's not a lot. And if there's a problem here, I got a big problem." So, at some point in time, that kind of fear has to be removed, and government has to step in and reassure people this will happen. They need to share, they need access to capital, they need an informed ability to contribute to the decision making, and then some of these projects will proceed.
Thanks very much. We're beyond time there, and something strange happened, and I had a phone hanging up in my ear. I couldn't hear for a while. I have Ms. Berube for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Keller. So, do the federal measures announced by the government over the past few months enough to counter some of the negative impacts in Native communities of the pandemic?
Thank you for that question, because I think that many of the programs that have been developed by the federal government are very positive. The challenge that we faced is that they have excluded First Nation individuals, businesses, and governments. And it only comes through a lot of persistence that we start to get some of these things considered and reflected. Well, respectfully, we shouldn't have to do that. You should be doing that as you institute the programs. And that's not happening. And that's a question that I think you need to ask. Why is this happening in this manner? Why are we always last on the list?
Mr. Jules, did you want to speak?
Yeah, clearly, from my perspective, we're not on a high priority of the federal government. We estimate that the programs that have been announced so far, on a per capita basis, Indigenous peoples are receiving about 50% of what other Canadians are getting. And so that imbalance has to be corrected. And at the same time, in the longer term, we have to be able to look after ourselves, and that can only happen through a new fiscal relationship.
Est-ce qu'il me reste du temps, Monsieur le Président?
Do I have any more time left, Mr. Chair?
40 seconds.
Bon, je vous remercie. Puis, juste une question.
Well, thank you. Just a quick question. How many Indigenous businesses have been forced to close because of this pandemic?
We don't know. There's no means for us to get access to that kind of information.
Thank you. That's a very interesting answer. And we go now to, I'm sorry.
Can I just interject for a second here?
Very quickly.
Yeah, one of the things we've uncovered, though, is a lot of our communities, because we're a loophole economy, the casinos are being shut down, which impacts the public health systems. A lot of our businesses are on the verge of bankruptcy because of COVID-19. And so the numbers are going to be strikingly high. What we need to be able to track that is a statistical institute.
Thank you. Ms. Gazan, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Kazak. Did I pronounce that right? Kazak? Is that right?
Kala.
Okay.
Oh, Mr. Ejiziak?
Ejiziak, sorry. Sorry, I slaughtered your name, but I at least wanted to try. So the Inuit Business Council is asking for interest-free lines of credit of up to $250,000 due to issues with Inuit businesses being eligible for federal loans. So I was wondering, to your knowledge, why have some of the Inuit businesses been ineligible for the loans being offered by the federal government?
So number one, I mentioned most small Inuit businesses are home-based businesses. If you recall, some of the loans that are existing are tied to the amount of payroll, i.e., I think they've reduced to 20,000. Now, many small business owners do not take a salary. They often are paid, they pay themselves dividends, which currently are ineligible. So if there's some money left over at the end of the year, then they would pay themselves whatever, 30,000, 40,000. As well, I think the challenge for many businesses, many are new businesses, and they typically do not have the financial information that's required to be eligible. And many businesses do not have bank accounts. So of course, the Canadian Emergency Bank Account program, you need to be tied to a financial institution. I mean, there are many ways to address some of these issues. We untie it from the payroll requirements. We untie it from a financial institution. There are existing lenders that exist in our communities. It's just how do we do it in a way where we're given the same opportunity. In terms of the amount, I mean, we think we have an extraordinary case just because if you can imagine building a house with materials you got to pay for now, but you won't be starting until next March. That's because you have to assemble the materials, transport them, get them on the ship into your communities before the 1st of October.
Okay.
And I'll have to leave it there, Ms. Kazan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're down to the last few minutes. Mr. Zimmer, you must be in Terrace Bay by now. If you've been driving
I'm just sitting here, just trying to stay on here. So I wanted to talk to Mr. Ejiziak because of my time is limited. I've been in contact with the Chamber of Mines up in the north and just about the programs that haven't really been impactful to them during COVID. And I'll just ask you to write a response to me later. I just wanted to save my last minute and 30 seconds for Mr. Callig. And great to see Manny here as well. Been working so long to see some change there, some positive change for Indigenous communities. Just wanting to be part of the economy as standing together with everybody else. And I think it's great. Mr. Cal, I just wanted to ask you about your Major Projects Coalition. I know quite a bit about it, but how many groups do you have signed on and how many projects? I know you have some ambitious plans. And if they are realized, I think it's going to be great, especially considering we're in a tough place right now with COVID, $1 trillion in debt. We need to get off on our feet again with resource development. So Mr. Kalla.
Yeah, there's about 60 communities from Ontario to British Columbia that are now part of it and starting to look at Atlantic Canada. The Major Projects Coalition responds to First Nations interests on projects. It's developed standards for environmental assessment, participated in the review that took place. It looks at business models and provides the administrative and financial support to First Nation communities who might not otherwise be able to grasp the potential. I think that we're now looking at a $300 million hydro project for in the Chislata area. turning a poor situation into a positive one by rewatering the Chaco River and creating fisheries again, using power that would be generated from this hydro project to support the development of a gold mine with the support of the communities. They are also involved in Coastal GasLink in British Columbia and looking at participation in the potential ownership of Trans Mountain when and if that proceeds. What we're facing and what they're facing is this need, in the absence of a new fiscal relationships that provides certainty around First Nations as a government to raise revenue, access to the capital markets. And as we've said in the past, and I'll say again today, the federal government needs to step up to support First Nations access to the capital markets to secure their equity interest in these operations if they choose to do so. Canada has historically done this in the past. The most recent, which is not the best example, is Churchill Falls. We think we can do a better job.
We need to get it done. Thank you very much, Chair, for your time and your patience.
Well, you still have another minute or so if you have any other questions you'd like to ask Mr. Zimmer.
Well, Mr. Calla, I guess we've talked about the access to capital too, to really be players and a pipeline possibly being acquired by the group as well. And I see you as serious players. You've been many years in the game to get to where you are today. My hope is that it will come to fruition where that could be a part of, again, moving together, forward together in Canada, Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities with resource development and the rest. We really need it all to be firing on all cylinders. So Harold, maybe just some last comments as we finish here.
Yeah, I think, the difference between getting federal government support at a rate that can be secured from the capital markets with that government support and having go to the commercial banking industry is so significant that many of these projects won't proceed, or there'll be no benefit left to First Nation communities. It is possible to structure a relationship with Canada using Canada's balance sheet to support equity acquisition and provide Canada a benefit for the use of its balance sheet. And I think that's the solution. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Harold. Thanks again, Chair and Committee, for again your patience today.
Thank you. And whatever you did, the connection was excellent that time, Mr. Zimmer. So thanks very much. Yeah, I really want to express my appreciation, I'm sure on behalf of all our committee members, to our witnesses today. This is Indigenous Heritage Month. And one of the things attached to that is respecting the talent and the quality of the people of our First Nations, and they're so well represented by our panel today. This is remarkable. I wish more people could have seen and heard this, but we'll certainly do our best to carry the message that we've heard today through to the decision makers. Once again, thank you all so much. And now I declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.